So close, so far. Graham had saved enough money working that he was able to get his own apartment. He didn't just look for the efficiency apartment, rather looking to move into an old farmhouse some distance away from the city. He was to meet with the man that had the house to rent. Graham took the day off from his job at the factory to settle the deal to begin his move. He was excited as he got the first look inside the old house. The man he met, Mr. Ricketts, was a stern, harsh character, very blunt and to the point. Graham had the feeling of intimidation as well as fear every time he talked with him. Nevertheless, Graham agreed to the terms of agreement with Mr. Ricketts and was soon to be the new tenant of the old house. It was a rainy day as Graham moved what little belongings he had into the house. He spent the day organizing his things and looking over every room, getting familiar with the place. Tonight would be his first night staying in the old house. He was getting sleepy and decided to lie down for the night. He turned out the light and, listening to the rain still coming down, quickly falling asleep. Graham had gone to work, returning home his second day in the old house. He ate dinner and decided to go to bed early this night. Sometime during the night, he woke hearing a strange sound. He was not sure where the sound was coming from. It sounded like a ringing, dragging then a thump with a ringing, having a metallic tone. The sound lasted only a short amount of time each time it occurred. The same pattern repeated many times over the next several minutes. Then the sound stopped, and he did not hear it again. The very next night, Graham woke to the same sound. Night after night, the same sound would wake him. He also began to notice that it seemed to be nearly the same time each night. Then, for the next several nights, it did not wake him. One day, Graham noticed Mr. Ricketts working at the back of the house outside. Graham got up enough nerve to approach him to talk about the noise he was hearing. He described the sound, and Mr. Ricketts responded, "I think you may be a little crazy, hearing noises in an old house. You haven't started drinking, have you?" Graham assured him that he was not drinking. He wondered if the man was right, and he was imagining the sounds. That night, Graham woke to the sound again. This time he looked at the clock, and the hands were both straight up at 12 midnight. He listened, and the sound stopped 2 minutes after midnight. The same sound repeated every night at the same time, and for the same 2 minutes. Graham now was waking each night just before the sound. Night after night, the same sound. There were nights that the sound did not come, even though he was now waking just before the midnight hour. It seemed funny to him that the sound would not occur on nights that it rained. Graham was becoming exhausted and struck with fear of dilution from the sound. This showed one day at work when several men began doing some maintenance on a machine close to him. One of the men was hooking up a chain to a steel lifting ring. The man laid the chain out, dropping it to the floor, and then pulling one end tight, causing the chain to pull against the ring. Graham's body shook at the sound of the chain making the ringing, dragging then a thump with a ringing metallic sound. He even yelled out with fear, causing the men working around him to laugh at his jumping and hollering. One of the men even said to him, "A bit jumpy there, ain't ya, fellow? Don't worry, these chains could lift a locomotive. They won't break." Graham recognized the sound of the chain ringing, dragging and thumping with a ring. His mind could not imagine why he was hearing this at his home. That night, that same sound he now recognized came at the very hour for the 2 minutes. Today was Graham's birthday. He met with his family to celebrate his 23rd birthday. His mother noticed first how Graham seemed disconnected and in a state of exhaustion. Others noticed as well. He passed it off as having been tired from working, not wanting to tell of this strange, unbelievable story of a sound of ringing chains keeping him in fear. He left the celebration early and decided to walk the miles to his home. He talked to himself and wrung his hands with worry as he walked, trying to decide what to do. He made it home and, once inside, heard activity of doors opening and closing, seemingly coming from the cellar toward the back of the house. He figured this to be Mr. Ricketts working on the old house and thought it to be a good time to tell him again of the sound. Graham went to the back and saw the cellar door open. He did not see Mr. Ricketts, but noticed something was partially covered lying on the ground just outside the door. He walked to the door and then noticed what was under the covering. He felt his blood run cold, shocked with fear, looking at the near skeleton of a body, barely skin on bone, pale white with a face revealing a look of torture and horror. Graham was shaking, but frozen with fear at the sight of this horrid figure. He felt a thump on the back of his head that caused him to lose consciousness. Graham woke with blurry vision from the hit to his head. He was sitting in a small corridor with stone walls and floor, noticing a figure in front of him. A door on one end offered the dim light from outside, lighting what he could see. His vision came clearer and saw that it was Mr. Ricketts who was in front of him. He looked down to notice the chains that were attached to the cuffs on his wrists and ankles. Then Mr. Ricketts said to him, "You came back too soon. I was hoping this would all be over before you returned." "What is happening?" Graham asked. Mr. Ricketts explained, "Well, it seems that I must keep you here. I'm not a killer. But what you have seen you certainly would tell. The man you saw laying out there was my wife's lover. I had caught the two of them having an affair. I planned my revenge carefully. I installed the chains you are now wearing. There are 2 set, one for her and one for him. One night I knew they were going to meet here again. I acted as though I left as usual but returned. I held them at gunpoint, bringing them down here and putting them in chains. I didn't kill them, but figured them to need punished for betraying me. My wife pleaded with me to let them go. I was angry and had gone too far to let that happen. I closed the door never to let them see the light of day. She didn't last but a couple of years down here, but her lover had the will to last 40 years in these chains. Every day I sent bread and water down the pipe above you. Every day that I opened the lid to the pipe, he would curse at me. I would stuff the bread down and pour the water in, laughing at him, then slamming the lid shut. Now I will give you the same chance that I gave them. You see, I did give them a chance to escape." Mr. Ricketts held up a small skeleton key for Graham to see and explained, "This key will unlock your chains. I will hang it here on the wall in front of you. Every clear night a light will pass through a tiny hole in the wall. It will be the light of a star that passes the same point in the sky every night. The hole will allow the light to shine on the key for 2 minutes. If you can reach the key, you can free yourself. This will be the only light you will ever see." Graham watched Mr. Ricketts hang the key on the wall and walk down the corridor, shutting a door. Graham was in total darkness. He wept sitting on the floor with the thought of having been caught and chained. He tried to see anything around him, but the total blackness gave him nothing to see. He sat staring into the darkness for hours. He then had a strange feeling that it was time to wake up and hear the sound he had been waking to nearly every night. He then noticed the faint sparkle of light beginning to get brighter on the wall in front of him. He stood up for the first time, feeling the weight of the chains pulling down on his arms. Then in a flash, the light became bright enough for Graham to see the key on the wall. He stepped forward a step and reached out to get the key. A ringing, dragging, then a thump with a ringing, having a metallic tone, filled his ears with the familiar sound as the chains and rings stopped him just inches away from getting the key. The feeling that he was so close to the key made him try again several times, over and over, but the key was just so far away. The sinking feeling coming to him that it was impossible to reach the key. 2 minutes later, and the light was gone. He fell to the floor with the realization that the sound he was hearing was the man reaching out for the key every night the light would shine on it. Graham instantly felt the horror of the fact that the man had never reached the key.